Moving on to exercise 12-5, now we're looking at utilization of a constrained resource. So we're given information, selling price, variable cost, contribution margin of 3 different products. Due to a strike in the plant of one of its competitors, demand for the company's products far exceeds its capacity to produce. Management is trying to determine which products to concentrate on next week in filling its backlog of orders. The direct labor rate is $8 per hour and only 3,000 hours of labor time are available. So part 1, compute the amount of contribution margin that will be obtained per hour of labor time spent on each product, because labor time is the constraint. So the first thing is to determine the labor hours required. So just for product A, for example, it's the cost per direct labor per unit. So direct labor cost per unit is $12. They pay $8 per hour, which is given to us down here in the question. So if you take 12 divided by 8, we find it's going to be direct labor hours required of 1.5 per unit of product A. Product B, they pay $32, but it's $8 per hour. So 32 divided by 8 shows us that direct labor hours required for that product is 4. And same thing here. It costs $16 in direct labor to make product C. The labor costs $8 per hour, so 16 divided by 8 is 2. So there we know it takes 2 hours to make this product. So this is what they've done here. So the direct labor cost per unit divided by the direct labor rate per hour will give us the direct labor hours required to produce 1 unit. That's the number of hours. Now that could be given to you like this in a question where you have to work out how many hours, or it could be given to you directly. It could say it takes 1.5 direct labor hours. So that's something you need to look out for in a question. Then the next step is we're given the contribution margin per unit in the question. Now we need to figure out the contribution margin per direct labor hour. That's the constraint. So we would take the contribution margin per unit of $18 for product A and divide it by the direct labor hours required per that unit. So 18 divided by 1.5, and we get a contribution margin of $12. Product B would be $36 divided by 4 to give you 9, and product C, $20 divided by 2 to give you 10. So this is the relevant number that we're looking for, contribution margin per whatever the constraint is. Then, which orders would you recommend that the company work on next week? So we know that there's 3,000 hours available. So if it worked, now looking at this, you know that you should take the item that has the highest contribution margin per whatever the constraint, per whatever item the constraining item is. So here it's $12. And just to show that out, $12 per hour with 3,000 hours, the total contribution margin would be $36,000. If you picked product B, it would be $9 times 3,000 for $27,000, or product C, $10 times 3,000 for $30. So we can clearly see picking the one with the highest contribution margin per unit of constraint would get the highest contribution total contribution margin. And in part 3, by paying overtime wages, more than 3,000 hours of direct labor time can be made available. Up to how much should the company be willing to pay per hour in overtime wages, as long as there's unfulfilled demand? So the logic here is we're going to assume that they would continue making product A. Now we're not giving any further information to say that the demand is limited at a certain amount and they'd proceed on. So just giving the assumption that they would just continue making the product with the highest contribution margin per direct labor hour, they continue making A. If they make product A, they're getting in at $12 per unit of contribution margin. So they'd be willing to spend up to that extra $12. Now that $12 also already takes into account the direct labor rate of $8 here. So they would be willing to pay the original 8 plus up to 12 more, so up to 20. Now obviously they're going to prefer to pay less because it's going to, every bit they pay in overtime is going to eat away at this contribution margin here, but they would be willing to pay up to that amount.